So I know we went back and forth about whether or not to give a second week to the subject of forgiveness. And I think I was just moved by how powerful everybody's share was last week.
Well, for now we have lost Z, but hopefully.
Yeah, she was
Yeah.
buffering and then she went out. Yeah, oh,
Yeah.
there she is.
Yeah.
I see, Z. You were buffering, Z.
Yeah, my internet is misbehaving once again. So hopefully it'll get me through the night.
Sounds good now.
We hope.
Yeah. I was anyway, I was thinking that it would be nice to talk about forgiving others, in part because I realize that there's a different aspect of forgiving others that we don't cover in forgiving ourselves. We kind of have to forgive ourselves because we're stuck with ourselves, you know? But when we're in conflict with someone else, we can just walk away and we can be very righteously angry and sometimes, angry for a good reason. And it may not be as easy to understand why it's important to forgive people that have legitimately hurt us. So I wanted to talk about that tonight. And I want to talk about it and share some inspirational stories about forgiveness, starting with Anthony Ray Hinton. So Anthony Ray Hinton, Bruce is nodding his head. He may have heard of him. Others of you may have heard of him. He's a very inspirational activist, has written a book about his experience, and the crux of his messages is forgiveness. And I'll tell you a little bit about his story. In 1985, two fast food managers were robbed and murdered in different fast food locations. And there was an eyewitness, and she somehow identified Anthony Ray Hinton out of a lineup as the person that had done these murders. There was no motive, there was nothing that tied him to it, but he was identified. So they searched his home that he shared with his mother. He was like 29 or something at the time, lived with a single mom. And his mom had a gun, and they confiscated the gun. And the prosecution put forth evidence that the gun matched the bullets that killed these two people. And Anthony Ray he was poor. He was represented by a public defender. And the public defender was Black, and his public defender was racist and made a lot of racist comments to him, like, oh, all you Black folks just stick up for each other. You never admit to do anything wrong. And he didn't believe in his client, but nonetheless, he put on a defense. But he believed for some reason that he was only allocated $1,000 to hire an expert witness. And the only expert that he could get on the issue of ballistics who would accept the paltry sum of $1,000, this was 1985, that was still not a lot of money then for somebody of that kind of expertise. The only person that would accept $1,000 was a guy who had almost no experience and had difficulty seeing, had very bad vision. So when the defense expert testified, the prosecution argued that he couldn't even really see well in the microscope to be able to, match the signature of the bullet to the signature of the gun to make that determination. And the jury just discounted the expert's testimony that the bullets didn't match the mother's gun. And Anthony Ray's boss, his manager at his job, he worked in a supermarket, and his manager testified that on the night of the murders, Anthony Ray was working and sweeping floors and could not have possibly committed the crimes. And the jury just discounted the testimony for no apparent reason. And they convicted him and sentenced him to death. And that was in 1985. He spent 28 years on death row and was mostly in isolation the whole time. At some point, he started a book club and was allowed to meet with other members of death row for purposes of the book club. So he got to know them only to see them all killed. He was the last one remaining on death row. And in fact, his cell was so close to the electric chair that he could smell the bodies of his friends burning. So it was really a horrendous experience for him. 10 years into his time on death row, I'm trying to think the name of one of these organizations, one of these organizations that does work to try to free people from death row, not the Innocence Project. They took on his case and they spent years trying to clear his name. Eventually it was determined, I think even by FBI ballistics experts, that the bullets did not in fact match the gun. And they tried to get his case overturned in the Alabama courts, and they wouldn't overturn it. And it was not until 2015 when finally, on the grounds of ineffective assistance of counsel, the United States Supreme Court overturned his case, and the prosecutor did not retry it because they had no ballistics evidence that was valid, and he was freed 30 years after his conviction. And when he got out, he was filled with forgiveness. And he said, what I learned about forgiveness is that it's not about the other person, it's about me. I didn't forgive those people who did this to me because they asked me to, or because they called me or wrote me. I didn't forgive them so that they could sleep good at night. I forgave them so I could sleep good at night. He said, true forgiveness is the only way to be free, and I want to be free. So not surprisingly, forgiveness is spoken of quite a bit in the suttas and by the Buddha. And I thought of reading some of the suttas that talk about forgiveness, but I really liked some of the modern day examples, like Anthony Ray Hinton. But in Buddhist practice, of course, we're always working to free ourselves, and we focus on freeing ourselves of greed and hatred and delusion, understanding that unless we let go of those things, we're never going to be free. And it's not just because they cause suffering, but because anytime you're under the clenches of greed or hatred or delusion, your choices are 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 basically controlled by the greed and the hatred and the delusion. You're not actually acting of free will, acting under the influence of the greed, of the hatred, of the delusion. And that's what makes you not free. It's not just that there's suffering, it's that it's like you're captive to the controls of these poisons. And every minute that you're subject to them, you're not free. And so the same is true when you're carrying resentment, when you're carrying a grudge. You've probably heard the quote, holding on to anger is like picking up a hot coal with the intent of throwing it at the person that you're angry at. Of course, the only person that you burn is yourself. And so when we carry around these resentments, these angers, these burdens, these grudges, we're carrying around a hot coal. And basically forgiveness is our way to putting down the hot coal. And we're doing it so that we don't get burned. And yeah, sometimes when we forgive others, it also sets them free. And that's nice. But that's, it's kind of like metta. We do metta for ourselves too. We do metta so we can open our hearts. Yeah, it's nice to do metta for somebody else, but it's primarily so that our hearts are free. We also forgive because we understand that we're all human and that we all make mistakes. And we forgive because we understand that only hurt people hurt people. And when we remember that, we know that it's not just that we understand that the person that we're forgiving is a person and that we connect with their humanity, and maybe we can summon the compassion for the little one that was hurt, that made them grow up to be a hurt person who hurts people. But we also forgive because we don't want ourselves to live the legacy of a hurt person who hurts people. If we're not forgiving, then we're identifying with that hurt person. And it makes it that much more easy for us to hurt people. If we forgive, then we can be the healed person who heals people. So you may have heard me in the past talk about a glass of water as a metaphor for our practice. I really like this metaphor. I've often talked about when we have dirt in a glass and we pour water and we pour water and we pour water. As we continue to pour water, we dilute the dirt and it becomes muddy water at first, and then it becomes dirty water, and then it becomes slightly dirty water. The more we keep pouring the water in, the more we clean it and purify. And I think that's like what we're doing when we're practicing a lot of the times. But I'm going to slightly vary the metaphor. And in this case, when somebody's hurt us, it's like they've taken a dump in our glass. And there's a big pile of crap on the bottom of the glass. And we pour the water and we pour the water and we pour the water. But unless we're actually willing to turn the glass upside down and get rid of the shit, we're never going to be able to clean the glass. And we're never going to have clear water. And if we are not willing to forgive, it's like we're not willing to let go of that, to dump that shit out. And then we can actually then we can start cleaning the glass. There's going to be residue, sure. But then as we start to do metta and do compassion and do mindfulness practice and do joy practice and do all the things that brings goodness into our hearts and our minds and our bodies, then we can really start to try to purify. But we have to be able to get rid of that crap that somebody else put in there, but we're holding on to. I think, sometimes we hold on to it because we feel like that anger is our sense of protection. Like if we're not angry, we may let that person do that to us again. Or if we're not angry, we may be vulnerable and we may be, prey for other people to victimize us. And somehow our anger emboldens us and we feel righteous and powerful and protected by our anger. And I think that anger needs to be honored and respected. And there is a time when the anger may actually be our protection. And I wonder, some of you may know, I don't, if biologically, developmentally, anger was given to us as an emotion, as a legitimate protection. It may be. I don't really know the origins of all the emotions that we feel and why we as human beings came to feel all these emotions, but I wouldn't be surprised if anger is part of our survival toolkit. But there comes a time when we have to recognize that the actual threat is no longer present, and that the anger no longer serves us. And I think when the anger serve a function other than to make us powerful is the time that we need to let it go and step into the true power of an open heart. That's ultimately our greatest protection, is love. Is love. And when we're holding on to hatred, when we're holding on to anger, when we're holding on to resentment, we're barricading our heart in some way from being open and from the power of love. In my own life, I couldn't help but feel a little hypocritical as I was preparing for this talk, because in my own life, I'm embroiled in something that is the opposite of forgiveness. And just thought I would share it a bit. I lost part of my hearing in one of my ears in 2012, and had been trying to figure out what it was and if it could be helped. For a number of years, had been misdiagnosed, mistreated, and mostly my hearing just kind of stayed the same, impaired, but still pretty functional. And then I finally got diagnosed with a particular condition that I was told was treatable and reversible, and I could get my hearing back. So in 2018, a surgeon who basically assured me that this is what was going on with my ear, persuaded me, who is not someone who's particularly fond of Western medicine and serious medical intervention, persuaded me to have surgery to restore my hearing. Except he misdiagnosed me. And the surgery process, for reasons I won't get into, was very traumatizing. And during the surgery, when he realized he misdiagnosed me, he made a determination that what was wrong with my ear was something else, which was also a misdiagnosis. But he went ahead and did a procedure on me to try to correct that, and never asked me for my consent to do that procedure, even though I was awake and perfectly capable of giving my consent or not. And I probably would not have consented to it because it was a riskier procedure than the one that I had consented to. And somewhere along the way, I ended up losing all my hearing in that ear. And it's been quite a struggle. I have constant noise, I have dizziness, I have throbbing, I have pain. And it's kind of a nightmare. And I decided to sue the doctor. And that has been another nightmare. So now it's almost 3 years later. And at some point, not that long ago, I realized that it's not serving me to keep this torment going. And unfortunately, I'm tied in financially now. If I backed out, I would owe thousands or tens of thousands of dollars if I dropped the case. So I'm stuck in it. But it is clear to me that holding on to the resentment and even looking for justice, and, you know, my motives for suing him were not that I thought I would get a lot of money, but that I thought that his arrogance needed to be put in check, and that if somebody didn't do it, he would hurt somebody else. Kind of like, I don't know if you ever saw that movie Bombshell, the real life story of those women who worked for some major news network and being sexually harassed. And some of them, most of them didn't say anything because their careers were thriving in spite of it. And, but because they didn't say anything, it continued. And some women really suffered as a result. And I feel like when you've been harmed, you have a duty almost to call the person harming to task so that he doesn't harm others. But it's been at great peril to my well-being. And I feel like as soon as the case is over, I look forward to undertaking the practice of trying to forgive, because that's really the only way that I'm going to find any salvation. I thought it might be from having a jury say, yeah, what he did was wrong. I thought it might be, the look on his face when he was told that, he was culpable. But no, I understand that I'm not going to be free until I free myself, until I let go and forgive. Maya Angelou said, "You can't forgive without loving." And I don't mean sentimentality. I don't mean mush. I mean having enough courage to stand up and say, I forgive and I'm finished with it. And I think that's really the key to forgiveness right there is the courage to let go and to choose love instead. Because hate and anger might feel like powerful weapons, but if you have the courage to choose love, that's where it is. That's the strength right there. I want to tell another story, and most of the tales of forgiveness really focus on the freedom that it gives your own heart. This is a story where the forgiveness actually freed both sides of the hatred spectrum. So in 1991, Rabbi Michael Weiser moved his family to Lincoln, Nebraska, where he became the cantor and spiritual leader of the South Street Temple, the oldest Jewish congregation in Lincoln. And one Sunday morning, a few days after they moved into their new home, the phone rang, and the man on the other end of the line called Rabbi Weiser Jew boy and told him he would be sorry he had moved. 2 days later, a thick package arrived with anti-Black, anti-Semitic pamphlets, and it had an unsigned card that said, "The KKK is watching you, scum." And the messages were from this guy, Larry Trapp, who was the Grand Dragon of the White Knights of the Ku Klux Klan that lived in Nebraska and kept loaded weapons and pro-Hitler material and the Klan robed in his Lincoln apartment. He was a diehard, and he was only 42, but he was nearly blind and wheelchair bound because he'd had both of his legs amputated from diabetes. In a 1992 interview in Time magazine, Trapp later admitted that he wanted to scare Rabbi Weiser into moving out of Lincoln. As the state leader of the Grand Dragon, he said, "As the state leader of the Grand Dragon, I did more than my share of work because I wanted to build up the state of Nebraska into a state as hateful as North Carolina and Florida. I spent a lot of money and went out of my way to instill fear." Rabbi Weiser kind of suspected that these hate mails and things were coming from Larry Trapp. So he got his phone number and he started calling him every week. And he would leave messages on his answering machine like, "Larry, there's a lot of love out there. You're not getting any of it. Don't you want some?" Or, "Larry, why do you love the Nazis so much? They'd have killed you first because you're disabled." And finally, every week he would leave a message, just leave a message and hang up, always leaving messages of love and kindness. And finally, one week, Larry Trapp answers the phone, and the rabbi's wife had told him if he ever answers to say something nice to him. So the rabbi followed her advice and he said, "I heard you're disabled. I thought maybe you would like a ride to the grocery store. And he started offering him help to go shopping for him, bring him groceries, things like that. And then finally one night, Rabbi Weisser's phone rang, and it was Mr. Trapp. And in an interview, the rabbi later said, "I'll never forget it. It was like a chilling moment in a good way." Trapp said, "I want to get out of what I'm doing, and I don't know how." The rabbi and his wife drove to Mr. Trapp's apartment that night. The three talked for hours, and a close friendship formed. The couple's home later became a hospice for Mr. Trapp, who moved into one of their spare bedrooms as his health worsened. And the rabbi's wife became Mr. Trapp's caretaker and confidant. Mr. Trapp eventually renounced the Klan, apologized to many of those he had threatened, and converted to Judaism in Rabbi Weisser's synagogue. That's a really high bar, obviously. Um, but I think that, we can all come from a place of understanding that ultimately everybody suffers, and particularly when we suffer, that we can do whatever we can to alleviate suffering. And maybe that's going to be in somebody else, or maybe that's just going to be in ourselves. And I want to say also one thing important about forgiveness is that it's not spiritual bypass. We don't, when we're hurt, just say, "Oh, I'm just going to forgive that person." Forgiveness does not happen instead of feeling hurt. It doesn't even happen instead of feeling angry. And they're not mutually exclusive. You may need to go through all the hurt and anger first and really spend time doing self-compassion work before you can even get to a place where you even think about doing forgiveness practice. First and foremost, when you're hurt and traumatized, you take care of yourself. And you let yourself feel what needs to be felt. And at some point, if there's still resentment that you're hanging on to, then it may be time to move into the forgiveness. And forgiveness isn't condoning the acts that were done that harmed you. Forgiveness isn't telling the person that it's okay. Forgiveness isn't saying that you trust that person or that you befriend that person. I'm not going to go back to that doctor for my ear if I ever get to a place of forgiving him. I don't think he's a good doctor, and I don't want to be around him. Forgiveness doesn't say you let that person in your life. It just says you let that person in your heart. You don't close your heart to anyone. You say, "You harmed me. I don't approve of what you've done. I may never forget what you've done, but I forgive you. I'm opening my heart to you. I'm extending the branch of forgiveness because it allows me to be free. It allows me not to continue to hold on to this hot burning coal. And if the other person, you don't even have to say it to the other person. You can if you want to, but it's not about that, because it's not about helping them unburden their guilt. It's about you unburdening your heart. So in a little while, I would like us to practice forgiveness. And I'm going to have us do it only with someone who has hurt us and we have already done work with that hurt. Because if we haven't, the forgiveness practice is premature. And if you haven't already done work with that hurt, and by that I mean you have felt your feelings, you have grieved, you have cried, or you have raged, or whatever emotions are there. If you haven't done that work, then I'm going to encourage you to pick somebody that has slighted you slightly. And forgiveness is kind of like metta. It's like a muscle that we can develop. So we can start small with somebody that, maybe just cut us off on the road, and we notice that, they've driven away and they're listening to their radio and they're bopping around in their car and they're having a good old time. And we're like, oh, that fucking asshole. Can't believe they just did that. And they're having a jolly old time and we're suffering. Like, what good does that do us? So that's the perfect opportunity to practice forgiveness, to understand, maybe one time we were that person in the car that was so lost in our music, we weren't aware of what we were doing and we cut somebody off. Or maybe, who knows what their circumstances were, but we're not perfect. They're not perfect. We're all human. And we can forgive ourselves for our infallibility, for our fallibility, and we can forgive others for their imperfection. And ultimately, the forgiveness practice is a recognition that we are connected in our imperfect humanity. And we can forgive others because we acknowledge that we are all sharing this very imperfect state of being human. So I'm going to turn it over to Bettina. I just wanted that more talky part about who you're going to pick to do your forgiveness practice to come now, so that when we come into our actual practice, we can do so from a more quiet space that Bettina is going to hopefully bring us into through this movement.
We're going to stay seated. And maybe we'll just make sure that there's maybe some room around you a little bit, so at least you can stretch your arms out if need be. So, but if you could have your spine tall, that would be helpful. And let's just start with 3 lion's breaths. So just letting go of everything we might have felt during the talk, letting go, practicing forgiveness a little bit already. So the lion's breath is where we breathe in through the nose vigorously and then out of the mouth with our tongue sticking out and our eyes turning up. So see if you want to dare do this in front of everybody. So we're going to breathe in, sticking the tongue out. 2 more times. And then making a sound too. There we go. And then we're just going to shake out the hands. Shake out the hands in front of the body. Shake out the hands quite vigorously. having them sort of at the height of the shoulder, maybe even a little bit higher. Shake, shake, shake. And then start shaking the hands out like moths, like pretending that there's moths flying around, and just shaking out the hands in front of the body like moths, like a whole bunch of moths, and in whatever way. And then shake the hands again in front of the body. And then with the palms facing up, not touching the thighs, but just let them hover over the thighs with the palms facing up, and close your eyes. And just noticing the breath. Noticing the sensations in the hands, maybe vibrating, tingling, heat. And as you keep your hands just as they are, hovering above your thighs, begin to slowly lengthen the breath. Breathing in deep and full and smooth. And breathing out deep and full and smooth. And really focusing here on the smoothing out part of the breath as you inhale and you exhale. Perhaps breathing in to a count of 5. Breathing out to a count of 5. And we'll do that a couple rounds to really smooth out the breath. And then if your eyes were closed, you can gently open them again and just very gently let your arms come up overhead. I'm gonna let them come overhead. Maybe the palms facing each other. There can be a slight bend in the elbow, and we're keeping the arms up overhead in this way. Continue to breathe deep and full and smooth. And just allow yourself to press the floor of the pelvis down as you keep your arms up and the navel in towards the spine, perhaps closing the eyes again. And as you keep breathing, keep your attention in the hands. Allowing the thumbs, the fingers, and the palms to relax. And as you've undoubtedly noticed by now, the sensations will build in the hands. See if you can simply stay and watch the energy building in the hands, in the arms. Keep the arms and the hands up overhead. And then in a little while, in a moment or so, we're gonna very, 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 very slowly, I cannot emphasize it enough, allow the hands to descend down in front of the body in ultra slow motion. So we're not starting yet, but if you imagine that if you're being watched, if somebody's standing in front of you, that person will barely notice the movement of the hands as they're coming down. So begin to very, very slowly now let the hands descend, with the emphasis on slowly, so that you can barely perceive the movement as the hands very, very slowly come down. Really take your time. And as they're very, very slowly descending, keep the attention in the felt sense of the palms, the fingers, and the thumbs. Going at a very, very slow pace. The movement of the hands is your anchor, your focus in this exercise, just like your breath would normally be. Very minute and slow movements down the front of the body. Some of us might ultimately get there. The hands will come to rest on your lap, on your thighs, with the palms facing up ultimately. And then for the sake of time, you might actually have to move them just a little bit quicker now, so that we can all begin to rest, the palms facing up on the thighs. And just keep your eyes closed and stay here in silence. Notice what could relax, soften, and let go right now. And if you had to describe your experience in 2 words, what would they be? From this place of inward stillness and concentration, I'm turning it over for the forgiveness practice with Z.
Just continuing to rest on your seat, feeling the support and letting your pelvis release down into it. Relaxing any residual tension that you may notice. And bringing your awareness to your heart, just feeling your heart. Imagining that your heart is breathing. And just taking a few deep breaths just to connect to the sense of your heart breathing. Now I'd like you to call to mind your own goodness. Maybe a particular quality that you possess or something that you've done that was kind, like opening a door for someone, feeding someone else's expired meter when the cop is about to get a ticket. Or maybe something as little as picking up something that the person behind you in line dropped. Just allow yourself to recall some act of kindness or some trait of yours that represents your goodness. Maybe generosity or compassion. And feel into your own heart where this kindness and goodness radiates from. Imagining the goodness luminous in your heart. Imagine that luminosity becoming brighter and bigger. Letting your heart radiate with goodness. Your goodness, your kindness. Let the next few breaths brighten that radiance even more. Now, call to mind someone that has been kind to you, or someone who loves you or cares about you. Just call this being to mind. Could be a person, it could be an animal, it could be someone deceased. And imagine this being radiating their kindness or their love onto you and into you and your heart. And then if there are other beings that care about you or love you or have been kind to you, picture them as well and imagine them all in a circle with you in the center. And all of their love and kindness is radiating out, filling the circle, surrounding you with their care. Imagine it going into your heart expanding all the goodness that's been offered to you, shown to you. And feel the strength of your heart holding all that care, holding all that love. And in this vast, bright, beautiful, loving space of your heart, you can call to mind somebody that has hurt you. This too. And even invite them into your heart. Picturing this person saying these phrases to yourself as if speaking to this person. Just as I make mistakes, I accept that you too make mistakes. Just as I am imperfect, I realize that you too are imperfect. Just as I am a learner, I accept that you too are a learner, still learning life's lessons. I realize that just as I feel you have hurt me, you too have been hurt. I forgive you for the harm I feel you have done to me. Or if I cannot completely forgive you right now, may I do so sometime in the future. Just as I make mistakes, I accept that you too make mistakes. Just as I am imperfect, I realize that you too are imperfect. Just as I am a learner, I accept that you too are a learner, still learning life's lessons. Just as I feel you have hurt me, I realize you too have been hurt. I forgive you for the harm you have done to me. And if I cannot completely forgive you right now, may I do so sometime in the future. Just as I make mistakes, I accept that you too make mistakes. Just as I am imperfect, I realize that you too are imperfect. Just as I am a learner, I accept that you too are a learner, still learning life's lessons. Just as I feel you have hurt me, I realize you too have been hurt. I forgive you for the harm I feel you have done to me. And if I cannot completely forgive you right now, may I do so sometime in the future. And if this is bringing up too much disturbance for you, If you're not connected to your heart anymore, if there's just trauma, then either let it go completely and come back to surrounding yourself with all the beings that care for you, or maybe pick somebody else that you feel you can hold that harm that they have caused you and still have an open heart. Maybe we can take a moment and refresh and remember once again all those people that care about us and love us and have been kind to us, showering their goodness on us and letting our hearts fill with that goodness and the goodness of ourselves. And just as I may make mistakes, I accept that you too make mistakes. Just as I am imperfect, I realize that you too are imperfect. Just as I am a learner, I accept that you too are a learner, still learning life's lessons. Just as I feel you have hurt me, I realize you too have been hurt. I forgive you for the harm you have done to me. And if I cannot completely forgive you right now, may I do so sometime in the future. Just as I make mistakes, I accept that you too make mistakes. Just as I am imperfect, I realize that you too are imperfect. Just as I am a learner, I accept that you too are a learner, still learning life's lessons. Just as I feel you have hurt me, I realize that you too have been hurt. I forgive you for the harm I feel you have done to me. And if I cannot completely forgive you right now, may I do so sometime in the future. And you can continue silently with these phrases, or maybe if just one or two of them feels appropriate for you, just those, or perhaps your own, whatever resonates with your heart. And feel free to pause anytime you need to and surround yourself again with the love and the goodness, and let your heart replenish itself with the strength of care and kindness. from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. We must develop and maintain the capacity to forgive. He who is devoid of the power to forgive is devoid of the power to love.
As night is falling, we're returning to the circle that Z guided us in, where we're sitting in the circle, in the middle of the circle, and on the outside are the people in our lives that have supported us, loved us, made us feel seen and loved. And you're moving now to the periphery of the circle, to sit, to make the circle whole with everyone in the circle. And there's a gentle campfire burning in the middle of the circle now as it's turning dark. And we're just sitting together quietly, breathing in and out of the heart. And just imagine that the person that has hurt us or that has hurt you, what it would be like to allow them to come into the circle as well, just quietly to sit, maybe not next to you, maybe far away, maybe there's a social distance between everyone, but this person is joining the circle and just sitting quietly and just looking at the flame, at the fire, just like you are, just like everyone else is. And perhaps everyone in this moment is reflecting on their pain in the ways that we all have been hurt. In the way we might have hurt another. And to realize that as we're sitting here in the circle, we all share that in common. We all have hurt and been hurt. And that is really what makes us one big circle, one human without separation. And it's still okay to keep the distance. It's still okay to keep the social distance if it's not healed enough. But we just know that everyone, all of humanity, can take a seat in this circle. And we can all breathe gently together as we look at the fire, taking in the vastness of the sky above, the stars shining down upon us, and the earth holding us on our life journey, supporting us, along with these beautiful beings in the circle that we feel loved and supported by. And finally, the fire has burned down, and it's just time for everyone to get up quietly and leave the circle and return on their own journeys, taking whoever we feel comfortable with to invite into our hearts at this time with us on our journey. We don't need to invite anyone in, or we don't need to force anyone to stay in our heart that we're not ready to have there, to hold there. But we just leave the circle with the possibility, with the sense that we all share this in common, that we all have hurt and been hurt. And maybe that's all that we need to know in this moment. Thank you for sharing about your lives, about jars and mud and shit, and your hearts and your journey and your struggles and everything else that makes us all human. Thank you for Z for kindly offering these wisdom and guidance and teachings tonight. Thank you so much.